In our society now, Lyme disease is more of a political problem rather than an actual disease, because in Utah, I hear patients coming to me saying, I think I have Lyme disease, and my doctor says I can't have it because I live in Utah. I'm like, did that guy study logic at all? Because that makes no sense. You never traveled anywhere. And in Utah, we have had an outbreak in one of our cities. And they'll say, well, you don't live in that city, you can't have it. And I'm like, well, how did the bug get into that city? And why is it going to follow geographical boundaries and not leave that city? That doesn't make any sense either.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. Welcome, everybody. My guest today is Dr. Jeff Wright. Dr. Wright, as a naturopathic medical family doctor practicing functional medicine, helping patients get to the root of their medical problems. His focus is on therapies that give effective, safe, and noticeable results. Dr. Wright has specialized training in IV, oxygen, and regenerative therapies. And you've got quite a history and association in the field of naturopathic medicine. So welcome, Dr. Jeff.
Nice to be here.
Hey, I thought it would be really good for you to just kind of share your health journey that has got you where you are today. And it's, you know, it's in that natural realm, but yours has got unique elements to it. So maybe share a little bit of your background and how you got here.
So growing up, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, as we all do. I grew up in a family where mom was super into being independent. She used nutrition and herbs, grew up with eating whole foods, making things from scratch. That was just the way we grew up. And then if something went wonky, she had a whole medicine cabinet with herbs. And nice. On very rare occasions, we saw the medical doctor. And we tried to stay healthy and try to stay well so that we didn't need things. So fast forward on this journey, I was looking into things that were interesting enough to I could spend my life studying, and I wanted to get a doctorate in something. And I liked engineering, but math and I don't get along very well. And so that kind of pruned itself. But I really enjoy the way things work. I'm fascinated by the way mechanical things work. And when I stumbled onto medicine, while I loved the idea of medicine, I didn't necessarily want to focus on just drugs or just surgery or just physical medicine. I considered being a chiropractor for a little while. I wanted something that was more broad. And so I stumbled onto naturopathic medicine because there were no doctors that did that in my world up until then, but it hit all of it. I could do the nutrition and herbs, which I loved, but I could also study medicine like drugs and surgery when necessary. But I wanted to know when that was most necessary versus not. I didn't want that to be the only tool in my toolbox. And so went to naturopathic medical school in Portland, Oregon, finished my degree in 4 years, did a residency with a family practitioner here in Utah. And I thought I would start out just doing family medicine. I thought that was going to be the cat's meow for me. And one of my first patients had a thing called multiple chemical sensitivities. Now we call it other things now, but that's descriptive of her reacting to basically the 21st century. And I studied IVs, and so I was giving her intravenous infusions to help her get well. And truth be told, the best I can say that I did was I helped her not get as bad as fast as she would have gotten.
Gotcha.
She was on a downhill slope. I slowed the crash.
Trajectory of that.
And I just, the trajectory was down, and and everything I tried made her worse. And that made me scratch my head and wonder what's going on. I sent her to a doctor who specialized in that. He wasn't able to help her either. He sent her to somebody else, and that doctor said, oh, you have Lyme disease. Now, I had looked at Lyme disease. I was not Lyme literate at the time, but I discounted it because 2 other doctors who I trust, who are Lyme literate, said she didn't have it. So therefore, she must not have it, right? So that's where really the course, that's where my trajectory changed, in that question everything, find the real cause. And so that I started delving into environmental medicine, detoxification. I started attracting the sickest of the sick patients. And that brought me into more Lyme disease. But as I was studying Lyme disease, one of those doctors said, yeah, when they have a mold problem, I send them over there. And so I went over there to read that, and that opened up my world even more. And I started realizing that much of the cause of the really bad illnesses now are environmental in some form, not necessarily chemicals and solvents, which is what I thought it had been, but environmental things like mold, environmental things like chronic infections, stealth infections that people don't know that they have. And that brought me to here. And along the way, I learned about oxidative therapies, which are included of hydrogen peroxide and ozone and ultraviolet treatments and high dose vitamin C. That soon became my favorite wheelhouse to study in, because not because I think that gets everyone well, it gets people better. And it's a great tool to improve everything else that we are doing.
Do you have occasional brain fog or forgetfulness? Studies have shown that our brain has the best health at the age of 22 and deteriorates each year after that. Iso-alpha is a natural brain health supplement with over 40 scientific studies to verify it stimulates the vagus nerve and improves brain function. It uses bioavailable hops bitter concentrate to allow the nervous system to get into a flow state to release chemicals that help with hand-eye coordination, memory, and quick thinking. Iso-alpha guarantees results in 90 days or your money back. You can get this brain health formula at isoalpha.com. That is isoalpha.com. Go to isoalpha.com now to get your proven brain health formula.
I've since dabbled in or spent some time studying the brain. If you're a doctor, it's almost like you sign up to have health problems in your family.
Yeah, right.
I have discovered that. And, I never thought that my lot would be having lots of health challenges in my family, but we've had a lot of health challenges in my family. They seem to gravitate to the brain. And so I've gotten certified in a number of different training organizations. One's Dr. Bredesen, who does the Alzheimer's protocol. And I think it's the only Alzheimer's protocol that is getting traction. And he covers basically all the same stuff that I grew up learning and medically training in. And also Daniel Amen. Daniel Amen is the only one doing a lot of research, the one primarily doing a lot of research where he's looking at he says that psychiatry is the only profession that doesn't examine the organ that they profess to treat, which to me is frustrating. If you're going to look at the brain, you need to look at the brain and not just look at the symptoms of the brain. And as I've trained with him, there's a lot of other factors there. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Well, and that's such a good lead in. Those are several areas that I want to kind of dig deeper with you on. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate that intro. The first one would be, you kind of hit on it a little bit. Some of the typical conditions that you work with are molds and Lyme's and cognitive decline.
Yep.
Maybe we could dig into each of those just a little bit. Mold specifically, and from what I was hearing you say in the intro, it's a little bit of a different game today. And what are the factors that make us susceptible more? And are the molds different? Are the environments? What is the difference today compared to 100 years ago?
There's a lot to that. So number one difference is there's a lot of differences. So the primary difference is we build homes that are tighter because we want our homes to seal and insulate well, because everybody's concerned about the amount of power that we might have to make. So because everybody's worried about global warming, trickle down is let's make our homes not breathe as well so that we don't have to use as much power, so that we don't have to deal with global warming. And that's more complicated than that, but that's at least part. And I don't want to mess with that. So making our homes insulated better, which is, I think, wonderful, also makes our homes not breathe as well outside to inside air. And I live in Utah. We're a desert. We theoretically don't have any mold here, which is a fallacy. We have mold in abundance. Basically, also the way we build our homes, we build with drywall. 100, 150 years ago, we weren't really building with drywall yet. It was more wood and plaster. So the
Right.
reason why drywall is a problem in the context of mold is you have gypsum and you have paper. Well, the way that you make paper is take a tree, grind it up, and make it into paper. Well, by the act of taking that tree and grinding it up and making it into paper, it will have spores in it, just because trees have spores in them. So once that drywall gets wet, and so mold needs three things to grow. It needs heat, it needs humidity, and it needs food. Well, drywall is perfect food. And so if you have a warm house, there's heat, but it's not going to grow until it gets wet. So as soon as that drywall gets wet, then you basically have a perfect environment for that mold to grow. And so mold will grow within hours of it getting wet. That's what people miss, is they think that they have time when they have that flood to call the remediation company. And so they hurry and they get that remediation company there within 5 to 7 days. But within 1 to 2 days, that mold is already growing and has already developed a foothold.
Gotcha.
So that's part of the reason why when I first started practicing, mold was not that big of a deal. Now, that could be because I didn't look for it, but it also could be that other things were factors. And there's a doctor in Seattle area, Dr. Klinghardt, who wanted to look to see if, bad stuff grew in electromagnetic fields. And he did some basic testing and found that bad stuff grows better in electromagnetic fields. Since I graduated from medical school in 2002, we've gone from 3G to 4G to 5G, and that electromagnetics, I believe, and in my research, strongly suggests that it's helping bad stuff to grow, including mold. And I would also say, including Lyme disease, including other stealth infections, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, any number of other ones. So I think that's part of the reason why we have mold growing.
We have a more conducive petri dish
Yes.
for
Yes.
these molds to grow, it sounds like.
Yes.
And then we've got energy and all the different factors that they need to thrive. And so that's kind of an interesting deal. So how does mold impact us? What's kind of the negative impact of mold on the human body and physiology?
The easiest way is to say is it hits everything, but that's not answering your question. So there's three different ways that mold in physiology hits the body. Number one is it is a thing, and the body creates an immune response to a thing. And so anybody can have a reaction to a thing. So if you get too much mold in your sinuses, you're likely to get either allergies or a sinus infection. That's not what typically makes people really sick. Number two is you get mold in your body or biologic toxins from the mold. Basically, mold wants to protect itself. So part of the reason why in a home it is a problem is because it doesn't have competition. Whereas in 100 years ago, mold breathes, the home breathed within and out. And so that mold had competition from other competitors. So when
Okay.
it doesn't have competition, it tends to make more biologic toxins to maintain its monopoly on things.
Okay.
Those biologic toxins have a physiologic response. And even though I like to refer to people as mold recyclers, what often happens is you get the mold, it creates biotoxins. You get these biotoxins, which are toxic to our bodies in our systems. Our bodies are designed to deal with this. And about 80% of the population has the genetics where they can see the mold or the biotoxin, send the immune system at it, they get all hot and bothered, inflamed, they kill it and remove it, and no harm, no foul. 20% of the population, genetically speaking, can do that, but it's kind of like issuing orders to your military. You can go ahead and engage with insults all you like, but you can't use lethal force. And you can imagine it, if you know anybody that's in the military, they're going to get really cranky about that. Well, immune system gets all hot and bothered, inflamed, that inflammation starts spilling over into other things, but they can't physically remove the mold or the biologic toxins. So we have backup systems. Backup systems are like the liver and the bowel. The liver sees it. It takes time to get there, but when the liver sees it, it will process it and dump it into the stool. But therein lies the problem. These biologic toxins are so small, they get reabsorbed into the bowel. They get seen by the immune system. You get more inflammation, and more inflammation starts to spill over into other problems. And so that inflammation can go to the brain and cause changes in the brain, including hormone changes. And so you can get what looks like adrenal exhaustion from this. You can get thyroid problems. You can get other hormone problems from this. You can start getting fluid balance problems from this. You can start getting chronic pain. You can get autoimmune diseases from this. I mean, basically, it can hit every part of the body. And so, as doctors, we're trained how to diagnose the disease. And so, if you have Crohn's disease, we see that you have inflammatory changes in your digestive tract. But while we've diagnosed it, we have not figured out the why do you make inflammation to your digestive tract.
Yeah, going back to that, hey, the root cause of this whole thing. And
Yes. Yep.
yeah, and mold tends to be a common culprit.
Yes. And I always go after mold first because mold has an end, meaning, and I want to kind of give honor to the guy who wrote the mold protocol. His name is Richie Shoemaker. And he really figured all this stuff out. And so while I have a tremendous amount of honor for him, I am not one who follows his protocol exactly. And the reason I say that is because I found probably 95% of the people that I work with who have a mold problem get well without having to go into the details that he does.
Okay.
And so I'm a huge fan of what he does, but I found most people get well without having to go to that extent. And if you do not get well with having gone to that extent, you should find one of Dr. Shoemaker's trained doctors, and they'll go the rest of the way to get you well. But I found two things. Again, you have to remove the cause. If you don't get to the ultimate cause, you won't get well. So I found simple things get done. And the two simple things are, number one, and by the way, both of these things are non-negotiable. If you
Has to
don't do
happen.
if you don't do one of these two things well, you will not get well. It's like saying if you don't get out of the shower first, it's really hard to dry off.
Right.
If you don't get out of the house, meaning you are no longer exposed, you will not get well. And 20 years ago, it was leave naked and never go back. Now I have a company that I refer to that is now national. And I say, number one, you have to remove everything that was damaged. So you can't fix that drywall if it's got mold in it. It needs to leave. And I would submit if that drywall was next to carpet that is also molding, that carpet and that pad also need to leave. It's just not worth the minor expense. When I have people who have essentially spent their entire livelihood, spent all of their health, spent all of their fortune trying to get well, and now I'm telling them you need to get everything out of the house that's contaminated or leave naked, that's hard to take, but that's how you get well. It's non-negotiable. You have to get out of it. Second one is get it out of you. And so there's binders available. There's drug binders that are available. There's natural binders that are available. And once you do those two things, I found usually within around 3 months that people are well enough to know that mold was their problem and they're improving. So
it's awesome.
So if somebody comes with Lyme disease and they have mold, I say, well, I'm not going to mess with your Lyme disease just yet. We're going to take care of the mold first because it has an end. Lyme disease doesn't always have a nice, tidy end like that.
So that's a good transition. One, what is the company that you were referring to? We'll give them a little shout out here that does remediation.
The company is Pure Maintenance.
Okay.
You can find them at puremaintenance.com.
Okay.
They came in and chatted with me, and I would only talk to them because a patient said they were amazing. And after referring a few people to them, now I've referred thousands of people to them, and consistently they come back saying that their house is better.
They're doing well.
Yeah.
And so, and we'll circle back to how to get the molds out, but let's jump into the Lyme conversation a little bit here before we get into some of the detox and therapies. So maybe a little bit of background on Lyme's and its complexity. If you can summarize that a little bit.
As fibromyalgia was in the 90s and Candida was in the 80s and the 90s, Lyme disease is kind of now, in that it was kind of the junk diagnosis that carries everything.
Yes.
And I'm not one of those people that thinks that everything bad that's happening to you is Lyme disease. It just doesn't. It's too sloppy. And how are you ever going to get well if everything bad that's happening to you was Lyme disease? Just doesn't
Right.
make any sense to me. And I believe that we have a creator that created our bodies to heal from everything, foreign and domestic.
Agree.
So if you fix it, then by golly, you got to get well. Just a little scratch. So Lyme disease, no need to go into the history, but Lyme disease is Borrelia burgdorferi. It's a spirochete organism. It's related to syphilis in that syphilis is a spirochete, Lyme disease is spirochete. In our society now, Lyme disease is more of a political problem rather than an actual disease, because in Utah, I hear patients coming to me saying, I think I have Lyme disease, and my doctor says I can't have it because I live in Utah. I'm like, did that guy study logic at all? Because that makes no sense. You never traveled anywhere. And in Utah, we have had an outbreak in one of our cities. And they'll say, well, you don't live in that city, you can't have it. And I'm like, well, how did the bug get into that city? And why is it going to follow geographical boundaries and not leave that city? That didn't make any sense either. So Lyme disease has been found in every state. Just like we have bacterial resistant organisms, which have been that have modified themselves to not be able to, not bacterial organisms, but antibiotic resistant bacteria.
Yes.
Bacteria will resist insults. And so now we have multiple strains of Lyme disease or Borrelia.
Okay.
Herein lies the problem with testing is you can run testing, you can look for Borrelia burgdorferi, but it won't necessarily find Borrelia cousin it someplace else.
Gotcha.
And if you picked up the strain that came from, say, France or Germany, it may or may not pick up that strain.
So testing just isn't sensitive enough.
No, it's not. And then the second problem is politically speaking, we wanted to create a vaccine to Lyme disease. And so the FDA asked the labs to not report the two most sensitive markers so that they could use it for vaccine testing. Well, the problem is now those labs still don't report those two sensitive markers. And we often get equivocal or negative results on the testing because the most accurate tests are not there. Now you can go to specialized labs, but they're not covered by insurance.
Gotcha.
So there are specialized labs out there. Hygienics is a good one I've worked with. That they do a good job. And then Lyme disease is now Lyme disease and related pathology. And so the tick bit you, and I believe that you can get it from mosquitoes and other biting insects.
Different vectors.
Yep. And so if another vector bits you and they say, well, one mosquito can't give it, like, well, how do you know that you only got bit by one mosquito? I usually get bit by multiple mosquitoes when I get bit. And so there's more slop there, but I've seen patients who I think got Lyme disease from mosquitoes and biting flies. So that complicates the issue. And then, I've treated a lot of Lyme disease, and I treat as if somebody got a tick bite and they have a bullseye rash, I don't wait for the positive test. The bullseye rash is diagnostic. And so to me, that says, if you just got bit and if you just got the bullseye rash, I think antibiotics are probably the best therapy. But if I don't know when, where, why, and how you got it, every time I've treated somebody with antibiotics, they got worse. And Herxheimer reaction is a popular or unpopular, as it were, condition for people to get when they're getting treated for Lyme disease. And unfortunately, each time I've tried antibiotics on somebody, because that's what they wanted, on somebody with a chronic Lyme infection, they did not get better, they got worse. And to me, I don't like to work that hard, and they don't like to work that hard suffering that much with a Herxheimer reaction.
Right, exactly. So there's that good distinction there. The difference between immediately following an exposure and something that's more chronic. Different tools for different reasons, and it goes back to your intro. You know that there's a place for some of these pharmaceuticals, but there's often a more common place for the non-pharmaceutical approach. Yes. So you've kind of drawn that distinction there, which is really good. So basically, what are some of the strategies that you would use in a natural way for a chronic Lyme's, a chronic mold, do they have some overlap in how you approach them? Like you said, before you do a Lyme's treatment, you basically get rid of the mold. But then once you've gotten rid of the mold, where do you go from there?
Well, so once you get rid of the mold, that's going to clear away a certain subset of symptoms. And so if somebody comes in and go, my eye's twitching, my Lyme's back, I go, well, if you cleared the mold and your eye stops twitching, then maybe your twitchy eye, and I use that because it's an easy symptom to deal with. There's lots of other ones that are worse. But if your eye starts twitching when you walk into a place, you go, this is my oil light coming on saying my car needs oil, or proverbially speaking, you just walked into a moldy environment, you need to leave.
Gotcha.
So that's the first thing is clear away all the other causes so that you know what is actually Lyme disease and what is actually not.
Okay.
And so then the next thing is I do a full, full court press, if you will. I don't, I'm an equal opportunity offender and an equal opportunity user, meaning if I think that your water is poisoning you, I'm going to call it out. If I think that your coffee is hurting you, I'm going to call it out. If I think the supplement you're taking is hurting you, I'm going to call it out. Just like if I think you're having a bad reaction to a drug, I'm going to call it out. So in the same realm, I don't think that there is one therapy that's perfect for every single person.
Mm-hmm.
So I start with foundation lifestyle, what you do every day. So eating, sleeping, eating organic versus not organic is, eating the best quality food you can find and afford.
Okay.
And digest. And then there's augmentation, supporting and maximizing the digestive tract. And then next level up after getting nutrition and lifestyle optimized, then the next step is I like energy therapies. Now, I don't like to use the word energy work because there's a lot of slop in that. I prefer to call them physics therapies. So magnets are therapies with physics.
Sure.
On the flip side, electromagnetics are the anti of that and cause problems. And so I try to get people to minimize or turn off and minimize all exposure to electromagnetics, which in this world is impossible, but you minimize as best you can. Using therapies that are magnetic, like magnets. I think acupuncture has a place. I don't do it, but I think it has a place. I do a lot of homeopathy.
Okay.
And homeopathic detoxification protocols.
Okay.
And then the next level up is nutritional supplements. Those could be augmenting with, B vitamins and or trace minerals, as well as herbs. And I have some protocols that work pretty well for Lyme disease if somebody can't handle something stronger than that. They take a long time. They're kind of a combination between herbs and homeopathy, and they do work, but they take a while. Next level up is things that they would do in an office. So when I first started treating Lyme disease, I was getting with my IV therapies, they were IV nutritional, IV vitamin C, hydrogen peroxide. That was the extent of it at that time. And I would say I got 30 to 40% of the people well.
Okay.
And that was nice.
Yes.
There's still that pesky 60 to 70% that didn't get well.
Right.
And I have good patients who are gentle with me and let me know when things do and do not work. And so then I heard about ozone therapy, and surely you're hurting people with that, because I didn't know anything about ozone. And so, but I was open enough to do some research into it and got some training, and that became my new favorite toy. My new favorite therapy. It still is, but then, of the people who weren't getting well, now I had 50% of those people who got well. Well, now there's still another 20 to 30% left that weren't getting well. And so I looked into the ultraviolet. I brought that in, and now almost everybody was getting well. Combining ultraviolet and ozone together, the ultraviolet blood irradiation, combining those two therapies got most people well. And there's a number of different forms of how to do those. I actually helped to develop one with one of the developers of one of the ultraviolet machines. I actually helped to develop what's called the high dose UBI. It was in answer to a thing out there called 10 pass. I was doing 10 pass. I really found it to be effective, but a lot more of my patients had a Herxheimer reaction. And I really don't like to see a Herxheimer reaction. To me, it says we're going too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they did not get well with those therapies, I've missed something. And that's when I really started, when I was treating just Lyme, that's when I started looking back at, oh, you have a mold problem, we need to deal with that. That also pushed me into dental problems, chronic infections that we didn't know we had. That's a whole nother mess. That could be a reinfected root canal. It could be a wisdom tooth that were extracted or other teeth that were extracted, and now there's an infection there. And this is not something that's seen by most dentists.
Right. Yeah, the conventional X-ray doesn't pick it up, but you have to get the cone beam, and you really have to find somebody that knows what they're doing in biological dentistry. I mean, that definitely is another piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So when I find, for example, I had one patient who came in, she has Lyme disease, and she go, I do this treatment, I feel so much better for about 6 weeks. I'm like, well, what happened at 5 weeks that you got worse at 6? Nothing. I've been doing everything the same. Like, no, we've missed something then. And so I had not consulted her about her dentist and her dental work because her father was a dentist and I didn't want to step on any toes. Now I don't care. I just step on toes. But I said, what about the 2 teeth you had? You had 2 wisdom teeth extracted. The other 2 didn't come in. What about that? And she said, well, I don't know. So I sent her for a cone beam CT scan. Turns out she had 2 cavitations. She got those 2 cavitations fixed, and she stopped getting sick.